And with that, GDC 2022 has come to an end. What an amazing show this year it was at the Game Developers Conference, my favorite conference, and it was just such a pleasure to be back in person, meeting up with people once again, talking about video games. It was such a fun and positive experience. So many amazing things to talk about that I'm going to be discussing in today's video. Kind of just want to do a recap of my whole experience about the event, talking about some of these sessions that I was attending and some of the cool things that they were talking about there. So I should just put out at the beginning, the pass that I had was basically the Expo pass. So that pretty much just got me into the Expo as well as the sponsored sessions. I really was only attending the Unity ones because those were really the ones that I was most interested in learning about anyhow. So those sessions actually are supposed to be available within the coming weeks on Unity's YouTube channel. So as I'm talking about these things and you do, find them interesting at all, hopefully they will be available to you very soon. Again, just kind of stay tuned to the Unity YouTube channel. I'll probably send out a message or something somehow to you all once those do go live, because I do think there were some good things that were discussed in those talks. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. So Sunday evening, I arrived into San Francisco, ended up showing up to pick up my badge a little bit earlier than they said they were going to start handing them out, which ended up being the right call because probably about 10 or 15 minutes after I picked up my badge, there was already a line like halfway down the block, and it's a big city block, so there were a lot of people already in line, and it did not look like that line was moving very fast. So glad I got to pick my badge up a little bit early, and I know a lot of people were waiting around for a while to get their badge. However, that was not as long as the line that happened on Monday morning, the first day of the conference. That was a very long line, and I do not envy anyone who had to wait in for that. I know the first session that I went to was the Unity roadmap session. They ended up postponing that about like 10 or 15 minutes just because the line was so long and they wanted to give people some more time to get their badges picked up and arrive to the show for the roadmap session. So anyways, the first session that I attended was the Unity roadmap session. So this one was just kind of, a good overview about where the Unity game engine is right now and kind of what are the, next major milestones and things they're kind of working towards. Don't think there were any like really huge announcements in this section, but there were definitely a number of interesting things to go over. So for starters, they did show off their new flagship demo, and this is the Enemies demo. Some of you have probably already seen this on the YouTube channel. Just, that like very high fidelity thing that they want to showcase, all the latest and greatest tech. We'll be talking about this one a little bit later on in this video today because there are some cool things that I learned in another talk about this demo specifically. And then they went over some things that they kind of want to make more standardized, like the UI toolkit. So UI toolkit's going to be used for editor tooling as well as making runtime UI. They also want to make URP the standard render pipeline going forward. And they're kind of targeting the 2023 timeframe for that to basically be the kind of standard render pipeline going forward. And it really just seems like most of the stuff they were talking about are just kind of a way to make the engine just a much more full and featured engine. Again, it didn't seem like there was any like big game-breaking announcements, but really it seems like their goal for kind of the short to midterm is to just really make all those like features in the Unity game engine just rock solid and consistent across the platform. And then they also did tease the new sample game that they have been developing internally, which again I will be talking about later in this video. And they did have a few brief things to mention on Dots in there. However, the main content about the Dots roadmap was in its own dedicated session, which is in the session immediately following that one. So the Dots roadmap session was put on by Laurent Gibert, who is the product manager of Dots. And for this one, he had a few guests up on stage to talk about their experiences developing a production game using Unity Dots. So they had Lauren, who's the CTO of Ramen VR. They've created the game Zenith, which is a VR MMO RPG. And they also had Jonas, who is a software engineer at the Electric Square, and they created the game Detonation Racing. So they started off with a little bit of Q&A, just kind of asking them about their experiences using Dots, kind of why they chose to use them, and some of the interesting things that they did because of it. Definitely an insightful talk, and it was cool to learn a little bit more about how they use Dots in production. So we did talk briefly about the 0.50 release and what the state of things are right now, but the majority of the rest of the presentation was focused on 1.0. Now, a lot of this stuff is very similar to the blog post that he put out alongside the release of 0.50. So, if you read through that, a lot of the stuff is going to be pretty familiar for you. He was just saying that, what exactly 1.0 means. It means that it is certified and ready for production use, but it's not an end goal. It's really just a beginning step, because once we get to 1.0, there's still more work that has to be done, more features that can be built out. However, 1.0 basically just means the core feature set of entities is certified and ready for production use. Then once they're at that 1.0 release, then they can revisit some previously announced features of Dots, such as the Dots runtime, aka Project Tiny, Dots animation, Dots audio, things like that. So anyways, thought it was a great session overall. Always good to learn a little bit more about how people are utilizing Dots in production use, as well as see the roadmap for how things are looking as we head towards that 1.0 release. Anyways, after the session, I actually got to meet up with basically all the Dots project managers. So that was super cool to meet up with all of them and get to know them a little bit better. But shout out to the Dots PMs. I know y'all are watching. But seriously, could not ask for a better group of people to be leading the charge for Dots. Just talk about a passionate group of individuals who, are really excited about the things that they're working on and really just want to know, how their users are using Dots, and always trying to find ways to improve what they're building so the users have the best experience with their project. So once again, great to meet you all and hope we can see each other at another event soon. All right, but that was not all the sessions on Monday. I'm just gonna fire through these because I know this video is getting long already. So I went to one on version control in Unity where they talked about plastic SCM. So that was kind of interesting to learn about what they're doing on there. Does seem like something that I will be willing to try out at the very least, but it seems like they have some nice integrations with the Unity game engine. Another interesting one on the future of .NET in Unity. So basically they're talking about how they're shifting from .NET Framework to .NET Core. And basically, ideally, they want to get to the point where, once a new version of .NET Core is releases, basically day one, right away, that version is immediately going to be compatible with Unity. And they also talked about really wanting to embrace the .NET API, specifically when it comes to things like async and await. So they showed off this new cool API called awaitable coroutines, where you basically use the async and await syntax on a coroutine. And so this seems like it's going to be a really cool feature. Very excited for that to come out, because you can do much more complex things with coroutines, like pass in cancellation tokens and maybe even run them on separate threads. I'm not quite clear on that yet, so don't take my word on that. Also went to 2 sessions about the Unity gaming services and their multiplayer offerings. Seems like some pretty cool features that are available, lots of good, dashboards and analytics, and just kind of, trying to find ways to make it easier to deploy these, multiplayer solutions. So definitely some interesting features in there. If your game, takes advantage of that, I would highly recommend watching these talks just to check out what they have to offer. And so that was a wrap on Monday, just a jam-packed day, great day overall. Tuesday, didn't actually end up going to the conference because, again, I just had the Expo pass and none of these sessions that I could get into were really that interesting to me. So ended up just staying back at the place and editing the video on upgrading your project to entities 0.50. So go check that out. Okay, then Wednesday came around, kicked things off at another Unity presentation. This one was talking about their new sample project. So they basically kind of revealed it during this showcase here. It's called the Gagaya demo. And so this is a project developed internally by Unity by around 30 developers. And they basically want to mirror a production project as accurately as possible. So they're focusing on 3 key areas for this particular project: fun gameplay, immersive worlds, and shipping. So basically, they want to create a game that's fun to play. It has, an immersive, alive feeling world. And they actually do plan on releasing this game to Steam. So they really want to go through that, full process from conception to release, just so that they can really get a good understanding about the troubles of development for every step along the way. Now, of course, the game and the project files are going to be basically released for free. So you're, free to kind of pick apart everything. I definitely think this is going to be really helpful to many Unity developers, just to, kind of get an understanding of how things can actually be accomplished in a production-ready project. And they did say it's supposed to release sometime this summer, so I'm definitely happy to get my hands on this. And they are doing some interesting things in the Unity game engine. One thing that particularly stood out to me was how they were using visual scripting, but the way that they were doing it was kind of interesting because they used basically traditional mono behaviors where they had, complex systems happening in a script, and then they basically used visual scripting to kind of wire everything together. So you kind of have a little bit of the best of both worlds, where you have the complex logic that you can handcraft in your scripts, and then they also have the visual scripting aspect of it for things like state machines, where they can, you know, wire up everything all nice, and you can kind of have a good visual representation of how things flow and connect together. So I thought that was kind of an interesting concept that they were doing. And then after that, I was basically free to roam the show floor, just kind of talking about some things in general. I'd say the show floor was probably about half the size of years past. There were definitely still a lot of vendors there, a lot of people there, but I'd say it was about half the size of what it had been like in the past. Now, a lot of the big companies that are typically there, who you would expect to be at an event like this, just were not there at all. So Sony, Microsoft, Epic, EA, Activision, Ubisoft, they didn't have any kind of booths, and they weren't showcasing anything at all at the conference. So it was a little bit strange in that sense. Also, lots of blockchain and NFT type games and services were being showcased there. So that was, you know, definitely a little bit of a trend at this year's GDC. Definitely was not the whole entire conference, you know, mostly traditional gaming type companies, but you know, you definitely did see a number of these blockchain and NFT companies there. But really the general mood of the show floor was very positive. You know, everyone that I met with was just like super happy and excited to be back in person. It was a really interesting thing that I noticed. I felt like probably like 80% of the people that I talked to just in general over the course of the past week seemed like they got hired within maybe the past like year or so. So it was just a really interesting vibe. You know, I know a lot of companies have kind of been like hiring over the past year. So yeah, most of the people that I met had been, you know, not with the company for a terribly long time, although maybe they still have been kind of in the industry or in adjacent industries doing kind of similar roles. But, you know, it was just a really interesting and unique experience, because a lot of the people had been, you know, meeting with people on their team in person for the first time ever during this event. So it was just a really interesting vibe in that sense. So let's talk about some of the cool things that I saw on the show floor. So first thing that I thought was really cool, JetBrains, they make the Rider IDE, which is the development environment that I use, and it's fantastic. I recommend it to all Unity developers. They actually were showcasing a new free Unity plugin called Rider Flow. So this is something that's actually built into the editor. It's kind of like an editor extension. You can actually go download it right now. I'll leave some links down in the description so you can check it out. But it kind of adds some of the like similar search and like, you know, replacement functionality that you would see inside of Rider into the Unity game engine. So, you know, it was really cool. You can kind of, you know, search for things a lot better and, you know, do some nice, you know, replacements on objects. They even had like a little bit of a code editor that you can use inside of the Unity editor, just for, you know, quick kind of code edits and things like that. So definitely a cool little thing, and I would recommend checking it out. There were some interesting things with augmented reality. So Snapdragon was kind of showcasing their thing. They call it like Snapdragon Spaces. I was basically able to put on these Lenovo AR glasses that they had. It just connected to a phone, and then you can kind of like, you know, walk through this little demo space that sort of showcased some of the possibilities and cool things that you could do with their AR technology. So that was interesting. The FOV on that was a little bit small, but it was still a interesting enough demo nonetheless. But definitely the cooler augmented reality experience was this one known as Tilt 5, where basically you put these glasses on, and then they actually project down onto this like playing board on the table, and then that reflects back into your eyes. So you basically see you kind of like a top-down view of this game on this game board, and it was definitely a much better FOV than what you saw with the Lenovo glasses, although, you know, you're kind of limited to just that play space on the board. So I do think it's some really interesting technology, and yeah, really curious to see how well that does. There were some cool mocap things they were showcasing. They had this like, you know, one booth where they had some like crazy acrobatics going on. You know, people were like hanging from the ceiling doing all kinds of flips and crazy poses and everything like that. And there was also another booth that had a little dog with a mocap suit running around doing all kinds of tricks and stuff. It was adorable. So the show floor in general was really great this year, but by far the biggest and, in my opinion, the best booth at the show was, of course, the Unity booth. So the Unity booth was really great. They were basically showcasing, you know, all the new flagship demos and sample projects that they were showing. They had you available to, you know, click around inside the editor, mess around with things, and just, you know, chat with the people who had kind of worked on these projects, and they were able to talk about some of the details that went into this. And they were also showcasing some games made with Unity. So there were like Tunic and then Father, which is that game by Thomas Brush. But really the highlight of the booth was the front. They basically had this cube with this giant video wall on the front of it. And if you go around to the other side, they had this live production studio inside it where they're basically streaming onto Twitch basically the entire 3 days of the expo, which was just crazy. Of course, major shout out to Cal and Hassan over there. They were basically live the whole entire time, just chatting with different developers, both in person in the studio as well as remotely. So it was just really cool to see that whole setup. And also major shout out to Freeman and the rest of the production crew. They just did a really excellent job keeping the show running the whole time. So that could not have happened without them. So definitely thank you for that. And speaking of the live stream cube, that's where I streamed the Dots Q&A panel. So I was basically a co-host for this panel. So it was myself and Hassan. We were basically interviewing Laurent, again, the project manager of Dots. Just kind of talk about, again, the state of things, where things are going forward. So it was good to kind of get to ask him some more questions on that. And throughout the Q&A, we brought in Lauren and Jonas, who were at that Dots roadmap panel early on in the week, just to chat about them some more about the projects that they've been working on and their experience using Dots in production. So really happy that I could ask a few more questions to them. They were fantastic guests, definitely very knowledgeable with Dots and ECS stuff. So it was definitely a pleasure to pick their brain a little bit about Dots. And of course, thank you so much to Unity for inviting me to be a co-host on that Q&A panel. I had so much fun, and I hope that people enjoyed it. It seemed like a lot of the people in the Twitch chat were very excited for Dots. There were definitely a lot of good questions going on in the Twitch chat. So that was Wednesday. Now next up is Thursday. Thursday was a very exciting day. Had some cool panels that I've been looking forward to the whole week. So the first one was one talking about their new flagship demo. So this was that enemies demo is what it's called, with that woman who's kind of like holding that chess piece and she lights it on fire. They were just, going really into detail about the graphics rendering technologies that went into this, and talking about like the craziest, most minute details of things that they had put into this animation to, make it seem as realistic as possible. Like literally like 15 to 20 minutes of this presentation was just talking about all the really intricate details that they were putting in these characters' eyes. Like, for example, there was like little kind of like bloodshot red lines kind of on the edges of her eyes, and they were showing how they basically actually used a tiny little bump map on those red lines just to give it that like little extra bit of detail, just to make it feel more real. And just talking about like all these crazy things that you might never even think of. Like they had what's called like a skin tension map, where they basically have like a fully mapped out flat version of the face as well as a wrinkled version of the face. And then they can actually blend between the two maps in very specific areas as she's talking. So the skin, tenses up as well as stretches out at the proper time. So everything just looks exactly perfect. It's really incredible stuff. If you're definitely into like any graphics rendering type stuff, even if you're not like super into the technical details, but if you have a good appreciation for that type of thing, I would highly recommend watching this full talk. It was, really impressive. Next one, which is the last session that I went to, which was probably the one that I was actually looking forward to the most, which was the Dots authoring and debugging workflows. So basically during this demonstration, they walked through all the new editor windows and debugging features that are available in the new 0.50 version. So really great to see these all in action. Definitely going to be making some more videos on these myself. One feature of 0.50 that I didn't really know the power of until this presentation was this new feature called Entities Journaling. So what Entities Journaling does is it basically records everything that happens in your ECS project. So all structural changes, all data changes, all this stuff is stored within this Entities Journaling. And then you can actually export all this data to a CSV, or you can actually open it up in your IDE and kind of view through all the journaling steps that have been taking place on these entities. Really cool stuff on there. And then they went to showcase what the authoring and debugging workflows are going to look like in 1.0. First off, they went over kind of more about the entities journaling stuff. So they basically have a dedicated window inside the editor that kind of goes through all the steps for the entities journaling. So you can, just have a nice view. It's similar to like a console debug log, but basically for all the structural and data changes in the ECS world. And those are all just logged automatically. And then the core presentation was really focused on showing off kind of these new workflows that they were talking about, where they basically have actually kind of like an authoring side as well as a runtime side. And basically, depending on which one you edit, it can kind of affect the game in different ways. And they were showing how you could do some interesting things, like if you were to modify the authoring side at runtime, well, when you exit out of play mode, those changes will be reverted, similar to what you might expect with normal Unity. However, if you were editing the runtime side during runtime, those changes actually end up persisting. So it's really interesting how these kind of workflows work. Something that I really want to get my hands on just to get a feel for how this workflow plays out. I think there might be a little bit of a learning curve, just kind of, getting used to this kind of new workflow. Similar to, how at the beginning of Unity, how often you would like modify a value in play mode and then, exit out of play mode and everything gets wiped out. I think there might be a little bit of that. However, I think once we get used to it, it's actually going to greatly improve our workflow. I was actually talking with the speaker of the presentation afterwards, and he was basically telling me that pretty much the whole time of development, he was inside play mode, and he was able to just kind of like, edit everything as he needed to, just all without ever exiting play mode. Now, I don't think this is going to be an option for every single game, but it is nice to know that we can kind of, make these changes at runtime and have them persist if we want them to. But yeah, so once again, another great presentation. Would highly recommend you check that out once it's available. So then after that, I had some time to just kind of cruise around the Expo floor again, trying not to make too much eye contact with any crypto bros. Then walked by the Unity booth just to see kind of what was going on over there. Guess I walked by at the exact right time because there were some people that I recognized inside the booth. They were, getting set up to record. They ended up waving me in, so I ended up getting a second chance to jump on the Unity live stream. This one was basically just talking about being a game development content creator on YouTube. So it was Jabril's, Wannabe Manisha, Jason Wyman, and myself. And, it was probably about 20-ish minutes long, and I think it was just a ton of fun. We had some great conversations. Would recommend checking that out because the VOD is available. I'll leave a link down below for that. So that was Thursday, and then on Friday, I had another opportunity to just kind of cruise around the show floor. This day, I had pretty much already met with all the vendors who I wanted to speak with. So this was kind of just like a chill, relaxed day for me to go around, play some of the games, speak with some of the developers of those games. Got some good opportunities to play around with the Alt Control GDC, which is always a good time. Those are the ones where, you're doing all these like wild interactions with physical things. Maybe you're, like punching something and it's doing mirroring some things on the screen. There was another one where you could like pick up a phone to buy and sell stocks. Just a lot of fun silliness going on over there. But a lot of people exhausted on the Expo floor. It was a long week for everybody, but very fulfilling, very exciting week. So happy that GDC happened in person again, and just glad to be back and hoping for many more of these events coming up soon. Anyways, I cannot wrap up this video without mentioning that it was so fantastic to meet up with some of you. I know there were some people who I had kind of coordinated with beforehand, and we were able to meet up, chat about some of their projects that they had been working on. So it was super great to meet you all. Did actually end up meeting up with some new people who had basically been developing some dots and ECS projects who hadn't come across the Turbo Makes Games YouTube channel quite yet. So, welcome in. Definitely excited to, continue to grow your projects alongside you. And meeting up with people like that is, just really what this is all about. I mean, game developers are some of the best people out there, just some of the most welcoming, always willing to talk about some cool things that they're working on. So, just so happy to meet up with many of you and all the other amazing people that I did meet up with over the course of the week. I had, the time of my life this week, and, it was just nothing but happiness and joy with thinking back on GDC 2022. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this recap of GDC 2022. I ended up filming for quite a while longer than I thought I was going to. So hopefully I'll edit this down into something that's a little bit more manageable. Anyways, with that, I'm gonna go eat some food. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.